Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa. And tonight, mutineering troops seize Mali's president and prime minister after a dramatic day of mutiny and political disruption. Protesters who've long held protests against President IBK back soldiers and say it is not a coup. So it's been a politically turbulent day for Mali. What began as a mutiny led to the detention of the country's leaders. President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta and Prime Minister Bibou Cissé were arrested by mutineering soldiers on Tuesday. They're currently reportedly being held at a garrison in Kati, not far outside of the capital, Bamako. Now, all this unrest comes after months of protests calling for Keïta, known as IBK's, exit. Many of the demonstrators cheered soldiers on and say that they're glad to see IBK coming under pressure from the military.
A multitude of events have been organized. To see the military giving the support today is a relief. We pray to God that this is the end. This is the reason we're coming here today, abandoning our mosque and our activities to be here. We pray for our country.
He's never going to stay in power. Even if the men accept it, we women are never going to accept it. He's been cursed by the good Lord, which is why the military stood up, because what he's done is not normal.
We are happy because we can see that President Keïta wants to run away. He is going to leave power. We are happy to see that Mali is starting to breathe. The children are outside defending their rights, which they see being flouted because the future belongs to the children. Even an atomic bomb couldn't stop us today.
Well, the M5 RFP coalition, which has organised months of mass anti-government demonstrations, accuse IBK of corruption and mismanagement of the country. Now, they have denied that Tuesday's events amount to a military coup and say that it is instead a popular insurrection. Well, Mohamed Salaha is in Bamako for France 24. Mohamed, what is the latest? A lot's happened on Tuesday. Talk us through what the latest is.
Okay, as you mentioned, a lot has happened today. Today was a long day in Mali. So the last news is that the President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta and Bibou Cissé are not free for their movement. They are in the hand of the mutineer, which conduct them to Kati, the HQ of the movement of mutineers. Early in the morning, these mutineers start.
So, Mohamed, why did soldiers mutiny in the first place? Do we know anything about their motivations?
It was spontaneous. What we know is that there were protests several months in Bamako claiming for the resignation of the president. But early morning, this morning, people from Kati wake up with gunshot. They hear gunshot and military controlling everything, erected barricades all around the entrance and the exits. So this mutiny was so spontaneous.
We heard there that the protesters who've been holding these months of protests actually were cheering on the soldiers as they entered Bamako. Do you believe that there was any kind of coordination between the protesters and the mutinying soldiers?
It's true that there was a governing, because M5 RFP has called the people to gather at the Independence Place to protest against the regime of Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. But there is no coordination, as I know, there is no coordination between the spontaneous mutiny and the demonstration. They were separated. But during the day, the two events came up together because the military came to the Independence Place and they were applauded by the demonstrator. So they celebrate together a kind of happiness. In downtown, we can meet with military and civilian on the road crying everywhere, shooting and celebrating happiness. So there weren't coordination before, but the two events linked during the day.
And has there been any public support for IBK?
For the instance, there is no public support from Mali, but ECOWAS called the military to return to their barracks and called all parties in the Malian crisis to engage dialogue. This is ECOWAS in the region. And also, France has condemned this mutiny. So, but within the civilian society, within the majority, there is no official call to support to Ibeka.
And do you have any idea what happens now?
Now we are waiting for the development of the situation. In the next coming hour, we'll see clearly what happened. But clearly, currently, it's very confusing. We're waiting for maybe a statement or a public declaration from the military or from the government. We don't know really what will happen in the next coming hours. But we're still waiting, and we will keep you updated.
Thanks very much. Mohamed Salaha there for us in Bamako. Now, the developments on Tuesday bore a troubling resemblance to events leading up to the 2012 military coup, which ultimately unleashed years of chaos in Mali. Well, Professor Douglas Yates joined us now with more. Doug, what do you make of all of this? Does it smack of history repeating itself?
It seems like a clear cycle. The man who they want to remove, the military mutineers, came to power following a coup d'etat, in elections following a coup d'etat that had removed his predecessor. We're still waiting for a situation where a president of Mali leaves office through the urns. So it's a stunning cycle. And whenever you see a repetition like this, a pattern so clear, you look for the structural factors. So what are the factors that are present both in 2012 and today that haven't changed? And one is 2/3 of the territory is in a state of complete insecurity because of an independence movement that's waged in the extreme north by the Tuaregs, 3 separate jihadist movements still fighting against French and UN troops in the center of the country, inter-ethnic violence between Peul and other groups where whole villages are being burned, kidnapping of candidates in the election. And as we come looking at this 8-year cycle to Bamako, what was happening in Bamako? You had protests. Citizens were upset at nepotism, endemic corruption, and a government that was trying to stay in power. The names have all changed. The name of the president then, the name of the movement, and even the names of the jihadist forces. But the same actors are in place. If there's one sad thing in all this is that a major international intervention by the UN and by France, which decisively intervened to stop the ultimate cause, which is the war in the north, because of cuts in the budget, because of the failure of ECOWAS members to support this mission, because of the failure of the UN to provide the needed resources, has let all of these things come back. If we look at why the soldiers mutinied in 2012, it was because they found themselves outgunned by terrorists and independence forces that had received a huge cache of arms from Gaddafi's Libya.
And you think that may be an influencing factor for why the soldiers mutinied on Tuesday? Because currently we're not exactly sure what led up to it, but there is clearly a lot of frustration about the management of the insurgency in the north, and that presumably would affect morale amongst the soldiers.
That's right. When we look at what Captain Amadou Sanogo had said in 2012, he was complaining that his men were having to go to the front without proper munitions, without gasoline, without proper armor vehicles, and they were trying to fight a war, and they felt distant, ignored, marginalized by the politicians in Bamako and the protesters in Bamako. The one good news is if this is a perfect cycle and the military force Ebeka to resign, it's very likely there'll be a transitional government, a holding operation, and that they'll hold new elections because the protests are about fraudulent elections, tampering with the elections.
Okay, thanks very much, Douglas Yates, giving us a bit of the insight into the context that led to the unrest that we saw in Mali on Tuesday. Quick look now at some other news. The Congolese surgeon who won the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize for his work with women mutilated through conflict rape is reportedly receiving death threats. The campaign group Physicians for Human Rights says that Dr. Denis Mukwege is being intimidated over his call for perpetrators of human rights abuses during DR Congo's wars to face justice. PHR has called on the UN to do more to protect Mukwege. And more than 1,000 tons of oil were leaked into the Mauritius's waters at the end of July. The country has now arrested the head of the captain of the ship that was responsible for the Japanese bunker running aground on the coral reefs off the African island, causing an ecological disaster. Meanwhile, South Africa's first offshore bunkering operation has raised fears amongst conservationists about the long-term impact on biodiversity around Algoa Bay. Take a look.
Algoa Bay in South Africa is a spectacular migration route where an array of sea life forages and breeds. It is also home to around half the global population of endangered African penguins. But in recent years, ships have been refueling nearby. Now, local environmentalists have raised the alarm.
We want to protect our biodiversity and put Algoa Bay out there as an eco-tourist destination. And we can't do it with the risk of oil spills.
Bunkering, the practice of refueling one ship from another in the open sea, started here in 2016. It saves time and makes money. Penguin numbers have dropped by more than 60% over the past 30 years.
In the bay, in Algoa Bay, having bunkering next to the world's largest colony is just nonsense.
The South African Maritime Safety Authority, which oversees bunkering, stresses that the necessary consultations and environmental studies were done to make sure the practice is as safe as possible.
We need to sustain the protected area, but we need to use the opportunity to develop the economy. And there is a balance there. And that is the balance that we keep navigating around.
A difficult balance indeed. More than 40,000 people in the Algoa Bay area rely on tourism for a living. Beyond the environmental tragedy, if the marine life should disappear, so would the tourists and much needed income.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
Mr. Xu and his wife are finally going to be rewarded for their hard work. It's 3 in the morning and the cucumbers they grow are ready to be picked, packed, and sold. So they're in this badly lit greenhouse, headlamps on, loading carts with a vegetable that considerably improved their life. Over 5 years ago, Mr. Xu decided to join the local agricultural cooperative, even if he had doubts about how much he'd make out of it. He pooled together his land with those of other villagers. In return, he can rent and work on all the other plots of the cooperative. He makes up to 6,000 euros a year thanks to the co-op. That's 6 times more than what he used to. He also benefits from the many investments that have been made. Over 200 greenhouses were built and experts invited to teach the farmers about vegetables that could be more lucrative than the corn and millet they used to grow. The sun's already up when the cucumbers are on their way to a nearby market. Once unloaded, they're refrigerated and sold to a middleman who will bring them to supermarkets all over China. The man behind this change of fortune is co-op president and local Communist Party secretary Xu Zhendong. Born in the nearby village of Shuhuanglu, he came back in 2011 to start this project after many years doing business in Shanghai.
你像我们村面，它就是有一户一户小地块，不利于这么大规模的发展。把土地流转过来，我们一个是利于好规划建设，第二个呢，我们呢也可以说成规模连片好发展。
The wealth generated by this plan aligned with the government goal of revitalizing the countryside. New roads have been built and houses renovated. Residents have seen their quality of life improve.
最大的变化就是我们这个都盖小别墅了，都是住在别墅了，路都要宽了。
The party chief was especially proud to show the construction of new lodgings for the poorest residents. While the cooperative label might suggest that the farmers run this organization, the party has a decisive role in devising policy, as is often the case in China.
我们这个事情是我们村支两委干部去考察，然后呢，我们提议，党支部提议，村两委商议，然后再找党员、村民代表来商议这个事，大家通过了，那我们呢再做宣传，发动群众一起来干这个事。这个事情是我们这个党支部领创办的。
Shuhuanglu's development is not an isolated case in China. Agricultural output has soared, in part because it's scaled up, spurred by a 2007 law allowing government subsidies for the creation of these cooperatives. In this university, researchers say all of this works towards the objective of self-sufficiency in food production and the fight against poverty in rural areas. But despite the progress, Chinese cities and the economic opportunities they offer are still more appealing.
我们总体上来判断呢，就是加入合作社，这个农民的成员的收入。那么为什么这样说？为什么很多农民不加入合作社呢？那是因为我们现在有相当多的农民，他实际上是已经举家全迁到城市了。
There are alternative models too. Daniel Durso, an Australian expat in the country for 13 years, runs a direct organic farm-to-consumer business in the outskirts of Tianjin. He started this project because he felt there was a growing demand among Chinese consumers to have a personal relationship with their food. He believes his model could be viable for China as a whole.
The prices are different, but then the quality and the service is different too. So, you know, you pay for what you get. It's sort of a matter of priority. People are willing to spend 6,000 RMB on a new phone every year, but if they look at their own vegetables and what they put on the table every day, once again, it's up to their own personal education and there's sort of a perception on what's important.
Yet this smaller scale model is only a minority trend for agriculture in China, where farmers are still looking to expand their operations. Close to half of the country's rural families are now part of a cooperative, hard at work, feeding a population of 1.4 billion.